Well, let's see how we're going to start this today. First off, I want to apologize to those of you who thought the story was over. Well, it's not. I started thinking about the overall scheme of things, and I felt like there might be something else that we could talk about. So, good afternoon. Beautiful day today, 89. Just springtime, but 89 today. Nice day. So let's start part 11. I love it. Okay. You remember Joe Walsh? Joe Walsh was up on a mountain called Turkey Knob, northeast of Middletown, Arkansas. And he observed the what now we know as the people from Prime vacating Stag Hammer for a time. And Joe watched as those ships took off toward the moon and getting into a position to get a slingshot out to L5. Well, he reported, and it kind of got all the way to the top. So the story is that Joe Walsh had his comm unit with him at dinner one night. He had his wife Mary Alice and his daughter Alice Ann with him enjoying a quiet dinner, and his son Alex is on Prime already on the team designing the extrasolar Prime spaceship. He was on Shin Rand's executive team and was slated to become the ship's navigation officer. Well, Joe cleared his throat, and as the others at the table quieted, he said, "I have some news. I have a message from Prime." Brought out his comm unit, placed it in the center of the table, and after tracing out the enable command, the message began as Prime's figure appeared attached dimly to the comm unit with a single thin pencil of orange light. Prime greeted the three by name and began speaking. He told the three that he had a new assignment for them that would last possibly a number of years. He said that it had not been determined how long it would be and could be altered at any time and could even be an additional assignment to Prime. He told the group that as soon as they could relocate, he wanted them to occupy Stag Hammer. The three of them would act as the caretakers of the farm, while the four normally there were busy on Prime, also engaged with Alex, assembling the new ship in the desert southeast of Phoenix on Prime 0. Well, Prime continued by saying that sometime in the future, possibly sooner than later, they could be called on to be a part of the first trip to the stars. Prime said that in this regard they would tentatively be assigned positions which currently they knew little about. He said that as soon as that could be determined, they each would be expected to take subliminal courses to make them experts in that field. He turned to Joe and said that on his comm unit were further instructions about the farm that had not already been supplied by Mark Carpenter, the former farm manager caretaker. He told them that a moving crew from Prime would arrive in the morning to get them moved via the Bullet to Stag Hammer. That underground monorail just seems to be everywhere. He told them to enjoy their new assignment. He said goodbye, quickly disappeared in a small spot of light over the table, which then blinked out. Well, I'm going to tell you a little bit, not very much, about Joe's family. Alice Ann was presently 12 in her arrested physical development. Her actual age was 19, having spent parts of her recent years on Prime. So she's already indoctrinated, injected, and all those other things to make sure she never got sick and she was able to learn at light speed and all those things. Well, turns out all of them were like that. She knew that her brother Alex was already on Prime, and he was kind of slowly fading into the family background because he hadn't been home for a long time. And it seems like that's probably one of the features of this culture, where these people just didn't age, and they lived a really, really long time. In this story, we're gonna find some places up in here that's just seems like it's unbelievable, but these are real people on real planets in real situations, and they're not an awful lot different from you and me. Well, Alice Ann and Mary Alice were talking as they cleaned up the kitchen after dinner. Alice Ann said she couldn't wait to see what Stag Hammer looked like. She had never been there, but Joe had traveled there each morning as he assumed the caretaker position via the Bullet. She said that she had heard about the pool in particular and the farm in general. Mary Alice said that she wasn't a big fan of swimming, and that Alice Ann should begin to talk her father into a regular swimming exercise program. Benefits galore. Well, we're going to kind of let them go because Joe, Mary Alice, and Alice Ann are going to be part of the future. They have their own assignment. They're going to take care of Stag Hammer. So we're not going to say an awful lot more about Joe Walsh's family. Excuse me. Well, it turns out on Prime, Shin's design team were rapidly homing in on the concept drawings for the ships. You remember in the last story we talked about Shin had conceptually figured out what it was going to take to come up with a starship. He'd already come up with some things that were associated with the transfer equations, where it looked like he could finagle around the equations and come up with the way to get what Prime, the president, had indicated he desired greatly. Well, it turns out one of the team who was on the list of potential crew members for the Corvette, we're going to call this the little one a Corvette, had been working on the design with the team and had sent him a synopsis of main structure and equipment. Well, his name was Alex Walsh. He was from Earth -2. We just talked about his family. He recalled hearing that Prime intended to have his family take over the management of Stag Hammer and possibly be transferred to Prime for crew slots on the Corvette or on the main ship. I'll go away from the script for a second. We're going to get into some details about the small ship. It turns out the small ship, we're going to call that a Corvette. And I think that's probably in my memory somewhere associated with small fighting ships of the sailing variety. This Corvette, in this case, was going to be manned by a 10-man crew. I think that a 10-man crew was sort of like minimal for a ship that's going to go wandering around the galaxy, figuring out where they should indicate the big ship to go. The big ship was going to be designed after the Corvette form, and it would be manned by a considerably larger crew. So Alex got together some information about what his design team was thinking might be the form to settle on, and he sent this synopsis to Mac, and I'm going to go over some of these things. One was shaping up to be a Corvette of 2 decks, sized to support a crew of 10. Captain, exec, pilot, commissary, engineering, supply, navigator, and 3 crew who were destined to replace any and all other ratings as required. Remember, these people had learning machines. They could pick up stuff overnight that would take years for a normal person. So that's kind of the story. This is just design. Even as I talk about it, it's going to diverge from some of these thoughts. So, at any rate, the 3 supernumeraries were going to do the grunt work to keep the topsides neat and organized, and do the housekeeping chores to keep the working spaces clean, do laundry, serve meals as supplied daily by Shin's Chandler Commissary just south of Penix, near the main laboratory complex and support team facilities. Go away from the story for a second. The tool to work with all of this stuff, is the transfer. And The corvette and the main ship is going to be powered by a single transfer unit that will have its field increased to include the ship and another several transfer units are going to be used for this and that. Power, heat, other stuff. And that would include being supplied with ready-to-eat meals by this single one-place commissary down in Chandler, that's just south of Phoenix. So this was the commissary transfer unit was going to be able to accept a 2-foot cube box that would be transferred from the commissary to the ship and back with trash. And there's going to be a hot box and a cold box and a frozen box for ice cream and cakes and stuff. So, as I said, the size, this unit, the commissary dedicated transfer unit was sized to accommodate a specific size food container of an approximate 2-foot cube. One or more as needed would be for hot, just prepared meals, a cold unit for milk and veggies and the like, and a third for deep frozen ice cream and meat products and desserts to be stored temporarily for snacks. We don't want to forget that this ship is going to be populated by people. They're going to eat. And I think they're going to eat well. That's the way ships are. All these meals would be prepared just in time. You remember, this transfer takes less than a microsecond, less than a nanosecond. They're going to have a galley, and that galley includes a wardroom with space for 10, so the crew could as necessary be assembled for crew meetings. The galley and wardroom on the small corvette design was located immediately aft the two main deck officer country cabins with the bridge forward, which extended the width of the ship. These two cabins were for the captain and the executive officer. Two corridors, fore and aft, were placed outboard of the galley, with an athwartship's passageway just forward of the galley wardroom. Outboard of these corridors were 5 cabins on each side for crew staterooms on the ship's outside double wall. The bridge was the full width of the ship at 50 feet, 10 feet fore and aft. The length of the ship was 200 feet. There were 2 decks, the main deck and the second deck. Second deck contained the power and control rooms, engineering spaces containing the water takeoff, waste disposal with its own transfer ports, and a small workshop with spare storage in the aft center of the second deck. The workshop's stern outside wall could be opened to the outside for oversized equipment to move in and out. The bow area of the second deck were 2 separate toilets outboard and individual showers in the center room, all of which are intended for either sex. The bridge outside area on both sides incorporated ladders going up and down, one to topsides and down to the second deck, with additional ladders going down for access to the third deck catamaran structures, which extended with a duck foot-shaped bow forward of the main hull for 15 feet, and then extending the full 200 feet aft for the full length of the ship. These bottom holes contained the extendable 4-foot pads for ground support, keeping the main structure off the ground. These holes were 10 feet wide. They also supported the 6 main drive engines on the outboard side with 3 on each side. There were 2 engines attached to these holes on the stern for waterborne propulsion. This thing's going to float. In fact, it looks like a catamaran. 2 extendable rudders came out of the bottom on each catamaran hull at the rear and near the forward wave announcing horizontally flat duck foot shaped structure. If you can imagine that. Well, but it's real. It could happen. I've seen one. For additional maneuvering capability, there were 4 recessed small engines aimed outboard at the bow and stern for rapid waterborne movements in foul weather. The much larger interstellar ship was patterned after the small corvette with appropriately sized engines placed the same place. Essentially, the corvette design was a proving vehicle for overall design of the full-size ship. When the design of both had completed, it was the intent of Prime to publish it and provide engineering help to any country for immediate building and use. Pizza. Prime advocated a planet-wide sharing of any and all data resulting from the expected wave of outbound interstellar traffic. Location data was requested to be shared as it was determined to be accurate and useful. The Corvette bridge. Paul Cashman. You'll probably identify with this possibly. The Corvette bridge had 2 main chairs for the OOD and the pilot navigator. OOD on the right facing forward and the pilot on the left. Position, situation, navigation, and engineering displays wrapped around both positions and extended also down from the center and outboard overhead, aimed down toward the 2 positions. Each position could basically see the other, as the center displays came down only so far, so the side view was not impaired. The ship's controls were all placed in armrest side controllers, with rudder directional control provided with foot controllers. Immediately in front of the hand controllers were touch displays for changing ship control modes for surface movement and for space maneuvering. On takeoff, headed for space, the ship would normally get safely airborne, and then the engine attitudes would be changed to supply forward thrust. The shape of the ships were aerodynamically sound in the forward direction in atmospheric maneuvers, although speeds were normally very conservative until space was achieved. With the excess power the ships were able to call on, there was no need to hurry. The Stabog computers The Stabog computer, well, let me tell you what Stabog is. Stability augmentation. It's like a autopilot, only it's just for basic stuff. keep the ship flat and level. Stabog. Stabog computers would basically control the ship through this transition. Autopilot would assume full control as space altitude was achieved. The engine thrust was then altered to provide thrust down in the ship attitude, which would provide gravity-oriented travel attitude. The engine attitudes would be controlled so that engine exhaust would not impinge on the engines below when they were set for forward thrust. During takeoffs and landings, the crew would occupy rotating acceleration seats in the galley eating area. The computer systems for the ship were installed in the electronics bay room on the starboard side corridor just aft the bridge on the interior bulkhead. An identical space to port was used for bridge navigational chart and disk storage. The ship's star tracker computer systems were also located in the EBR. The star tracker sensors were placed on each of the 8 corners and were in structures which would be retractable, and external doors closed during atmosphere and waterborne movement. The bridge aft bulkhead on either side of the door to officers' country contained all the switches and controls for the operation of the ship. When manned, one seat faced these panels and was mounted on rails to the deck. The seats moved from one panel to the other as controlled by a joystick on the right armrest. This station was normally manned during takeoff and landings and space maneuvering. Well, Shin sat thinking in his office and thought he should possibly pencil in a tentative crew list for the Corvette. He was also thinking about the mission. What was going to be the guidebook for what the Corvette was going to do? How long? Where? Strictly in system? Or possibly be the first actual Starship Prime headed out to attempt rendezvous with Mark's ship? Remember, that's already outboard toward the Centauri systems, outbound toward the Centauri system. Well, then he thought the rendezvous would probably not be attempted, actually, because the Corvette could not accommodate the 50-plus crew members on that ship to bring them home. Shin thought it might as well not be considered, as the new engines would cut the ship travel time to the Centauri system by an astounding amount. Better leave him do it. That would not preclude, though, using the Corvette to scout that system before they got there. These and other things went through Shin's mind at near light speed. He made his decision. No more than 15 minutes went by until the answer came from Prime. Prime's message: I concur. Keep me advised. Well, that afternoon, Shin called Mac at home. He said that tonight might be a good time to gather the families and have a meeting. He asked him to call the others and have them all come over for supper. Well, Mac agreed to do that. Mac thought that had never happened before as a request from Shin. he wondered what Shin had up his sleeve. You must remember that Shin is only 15. I think he may be 16 at the moment. He's growing more mature. He's turning into a pretty good leader. Later, Mac thought he could never have imagined any of the steps Shin had in mind and had already put in motion. Well, after a delightful supper in 1001, Shin cleared his throat, and at this unmistakable call to order, he began talking. He said that would someone get him a beer? Drill immediately got up and walked to the bar and popped the top and poured the beer into Shin's favorite stein. Shin took a gulp and then said that he had this afternoon made a decision about how the project would proceed from this point on for a time. He said that he had asked Prime for permission and had got it immediately. Here's what we're going to do and why. Shin said that he had directed the spaceship on its way to the Centauri system to return to Prime. He said that when the ship gets back, it will become Starship Prime 1. He had directed his design team to come up with a retrofit design and have all necessary systems and material ready to begin work when the ship arrived. He said he had decided on doing this as the ship had only just begun the trip, and it would only take a matter of a few weeks to get back. Then, with an intact crew and basically a new ship, patterned after the Corvette, they could begin their voyage of discovery with basically no delay. Now for us, he continued, the family here is going to man the Corvette and scout out the Centauri system prior to SS Prime 1 getting there. In fact, he said, chances are good that there's no habitable planets in that system at all, and they could then go to one of the Wolf systems as their first target. Shin said that SS Prime 2, the Corvette, would then serve to do preliminary investigation before the main SSP-1 was scheduled to arrive. Primarily, he continued, the reason he had decided to do this is that SSP-1 already had a seasoned crew and executive staff to do the in-depth surveys of the planets SSP-2 will have detected and plotted its location. Most, if not all, of the local star systems had been plotted and located with some precision so their initial surveys could be done quickly. Stars with habitable planets would be a gift from the gods. Shin said that in a day or two, Mac and he would finalize the crew slot each of the family would go into intense training for. He said that he had already tentatively decided that Drell and Seuss would be the two pilots flying the ship. He said that would be a logical course to take, as both of them had become proficient at operating the simulator he had asked the design team to come up with as soon as the basic structure of the ships was determined. He said that he mentioned to those two that a ship simulator was available and that both of them had begged him to start taking them to work to try it out. Well, Seuss and Drell were looking at their fingernails while Shin was talking about them. Well, Shin continued saying that Mac was going to be captain, Sharon the executive officer. He said he was going to assume the engineering officer's spot, with Mitsuko being trained in all facets of the ship's systems in support of the ship's engineer. Gracie and Shelley were projected to be the commissary chief, with Shelley second in command as ship's housekeeper, which would include all normal housekeeping duties as they did at Stag Hammer. Alex Walsh was going to be the navigator. Pinky was going to do all sensor systems engineering, which included responsibility for all sensor systems, long-range sensors, software systems, and maintenance. Well, here's the list. A list of the crew. How many? 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. There's 11. That's what I thought. The ship is designed for 10. Captain is Mac, exec is Sharon, systems engineering is Shin, commissary Gracie, housekeeping is Shelley, first pilot is Seuss, second pilot is Drell, sensor systems and engines is Pinky, navigation systems and engines is Mary, ship systems and engines is Mitsuko, and navigator is Alex Walsh. Excuse me. Well, okay, this may be too much detail, but this is part of the story, because if you're at all interested in science fiction, you've probably read a whole bunch of stories, hundreds of stories already that mention the bridge and all these things. And what I'm doing is I'm filling in some of the nooks and crannies about how a ship is organized and people that are really necessary to get the thing to work. It's not going to be like Star Wars, where there's a Wookiee and a ne'er-do-well and a couple of computers, and they just go traipsing all over the countryside. It's not like that at all. There's a need to have the ship staffed. So at any rate, Shin finished the crew enumeration by saying that those assignments were not final, and that he may decide to sign on SS Prime 1 and assume the duties of chief scientist, and then assign Mary to all of engineering and be in charge of all engineering systems. He concluded that for the time being, he asked that they get with Mac and Sharon. He's talking to all the crew, basically. He wants them to get with Mac and Sharon to acquire the teaching aids to support those duties. He said that Mac, Sharon, and he would attempt to master every position on the ship. He said that if any of us found themselves proficient at their assignment, to just go ahead and jump to any of the other positions, including mastering all of the ship's sensors and translator systems. He then asked for any questions. Well, none were forthcoming. I think they were overwhelmed. He ended this part of his plan by saying that everybody on board would be expected to take care of their own spaces. He said that Shelley would not be able to keep everything spick and span without everybody doing their part. Shelley and Gracie would be the team keeping everybody clean, brave, reverent, and fed. Capability to support the various religious activities would be built into the wardroom. A Buddhist altar and a Christian sanctuary at this time. Shin then said that on Tuesday next, the Corvette's keel would be laid in the catamaran graving yard cradle at Spaceport Prime 1, southeast of Phoenix, and it would be a great idea for all of us to be there for the ceremony. Well, it's a good omen for everybody to attend, he said. He said that the plan would be to build SS Prime 2 in the catamaran graving cradles, and the initial testing would be for the ship systems to be directed down in cradles to build. Prime 2 was going to be built in the catamaran graving cradles, and the initial testing would be for the ship's engines exhaust be directed down into exhaust diverters there. Well, Shin then said he had forgotten something. He said he had instructed that the design be altered to include 12 cabins. This had become necessary as the bare minimum crew was found to be 11 in number. Oh. Shin exclaimed, "There's one more thing." Prime also authorized today a second Corvette, and the keel laying ceremony will be done in tandem with the SSP-2 keel laying. The second Corvette will be named SS Prime 3. Well, Shin then said, "Why is my beer glass empty?" Seuss and Drill both jumped to their feet and raced each other to the bar. Drill held the glass and Seuss poured. Amazingly, Drill made it back to Shin without spilling a drop. Shin did an air kiss to both of them. Shin said quietly, "Now you know why I gave the best spots on the crew to Drill and Seuss." Well, I just think the story seems to be bouncing around all over the place, but like I said before, that's what makes the story. Well, Prime sent Mac and Shin a private message to accept his call. Well, each put his comm unit on the desk in front of them and sat back patiently. Well, Prime appeared in the air, and although Mac and Shin were not in the same location, Prime turned to face each. He thanked them for their time and said he had a request. He said he had acquired information that he thought they both should have. He continued by saying that this information was in the form of the location of a star system, which some of the local outward-looking investigative systems thought was the location where some anomalous signals were coming from. He said that the star system is about 130 light years away, and said that it may be worth the time to investigate the system in one of their first exploratory trips outbound. He gave them the coordinates of the star system and wished them luck. Shin and Mac thanked him, and then Prime, with a wave of his hand, winked out. Well, Prime thought that perhaps that may not be actually the most preferred way to get them headed toward that system where Sarnox was located. Okay, he thought, it's done, and it's up to them to get there. Well, 6 months later, the first engine test was scheduled for SSP-2. Seemed that half of Phoenix was out on local roads and parking lots, out in the desert to the southeast, waiting for the noise in the rocket plume. Drell had drawn the short straw and was sitting in the pilot's seat as Mac sat in the OOD's chair to her right. Seuss was seated in the rearward-facing seat in front of the engine and control panels on the aft wall of the bridge. They were the only crew on the ship for the test. The rest of the crew were seated in an observation stand about a half-mile away, with numerous other VIPs and assorted hangers-on. They waited patiently, and Mary, seated beside Shin, was seen with her head bowed with both hands exhibiting crossed fingers. The order of the day was to examine the ship's engine operation and allow the ship to get airborne 6 inches. If Drell thought the ship was stable at that altitude and under control, the flight plan directed her to slowly take it up to 1 foot and then rotate 360 degrees right clockwise. Then, if that was performed to her satisfaction, she was to rotate 360 degrees left counterclockwise. Then she was to terminate the testing. Well, Drell knew that the 6 engines had been carefully characterized in single-engine test stand testing, and all 6 main engines had been calibrated in place, attached to the catamaran hulls. She was calm. She, Seuss, and Mac were dressed in newly designed ship's coveralls and a lightweight headset. Well, Mac said quietly, "Let's get this ship turned on." For the next few minutes, they each performed the actions necessary to energize the ship's systems. They patiently worked their way through the checklist. 10 minutes later, Mac polled his crew one last time for readiness. Drell and Seuss replied, "Hi," in turn, with Drell last. Test itself turned out to be almost anticlimactic. Thrust was increased in the Stabog system, controlled the altitude to the set point, and held it almost motionless. The ship quivered and rumbled as the engines came alive for the first time. The crew appreciated the fact that all the outside ports and windows in the bridge were photosensitive and stopped the high-intensity illumination down to tolerable levels. The three of them also had on special goggles as a backstop to protect their eyes. Drill held her hand out with a thumbs up as Sue said, "Go." The ship's altitude went up to an almost exact 1 foot. Drill and Seuss did the same actions. "Go." Drill pressed her right rudder pedal very lightly, and the ship responded with an easy clockwise rotation. She held the pressure and completed the turn. She pressed the left rudder, and the ship rotated smoothly 360 degrees counterclockwise. Mac instructed her to hold it in position for 5 minutes. 5 long minutes later, Mac said, "Take her down." When Drill had it safely on the ground, Mac said, "Seuss, your turn." Seuss and Drill quickly switched places, and Mac again gave the command, "Take her up, Seuss." Well, Seuss duplicated her co-pilot's actions and completed her hovering maneuverings with ease, as had Drill before her. They thought their 5-minute hovering test seemed to be the longest 5 minutes Seuss and Drill had ever experienced. Max said, "Seuss, take her down. Let's call it a day." Later, none of the three could remember ever feeling the ship finally touch down. It was so smooth that even the flight recorder, when checked after their test flight, showed an almost invisible glitch when touchdown occurred. Well, time to end this one because the next day, Mac intended for the crew to do a little more flight testing, and because I know what's going to happen, it might be a good time to start a new video to describe the first real higher than 1 foot flight test. Don't miss it. See you next time.